All right, so we know that housing and getting a mortgage is becoming more challenging with interest rates on the rise and with rising housing prices as well. I saw a story recently on the Global News website as rising interest rates are boxing many individual buyers out of Canada's housing market. Some say in a new report that Canadians are increasingly teaming up with family and friends just to afford a home. Joining me to talk about this is Clinton Wilkins, who's our mortgage guru. And Clinton, you and I have talked about this. You were ahead of the curve on this. You were talking about this months ago.
Oh, we've been talking about this for a while, Todd.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
You know what? It's becoming more and more common because in Halifax, our average house price is somewhere around $500,000. We'll just use that as an average number. Mm-hmm. And to qualify for a home at that rate, typically we need household income of about $125,000. So a lot of single people, they can't do it on their own. And we're seeing a lot of more creative ways that people are trying to approach this problem. Mm-hmm. And, you know, still Canadians have this dream of home ownership, and home ownership is still available for a lot of people. But people had become more creative. So we're seeing, you know, some scenarios where there's 3 people buying a home together. Sometimes there's 4 people buying a home together. I actually had a scenario not very long ago where 3 people bought a duplex together. It was a couple and a plus one. Mm-hmm. And, you know, they bought a 2-unit. They knew it wasn't forever. But they were really planful about it. You know, they sought legal advice about how to set up the deed because there's 2 ways in Nova Scotia that we can take the deed. You can do tenants in common or joint tenants, and they have very different legal implications. So I think it's really important to talk about things like this going into it. Mm-hmm. And they all did like a pseudo cohabitation agreement. So they really got their financial numbers down on paper. They knew what the exit strategy was, you know, if one or all the relationships end up breaking down. And I think that is important. You know, it's all great to, you know, want the thing and do the thing and you know, take the action in terms of buying a home. But I think that you need to sometimes look at the bigger picture. And I think you need to get advice from professionals.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the potential pitfalls with something like this?
Well, you know, if it's joint tenants, if someone were to pass away, the deed would just automatically go to the other person. So, I mean, that's one thing. But in many scenarios where there's multiple buyers buying a property, they're doing tenants in common. So sometimes we consider that, you know, different percentages of home ownership. So, you know, we've certainly seen scenarios where maybe a young couple buy a home and a parent co-signs and they do tenants in common. And it's like 99% for this pair and 1% for the other. So really, they're on there just for the sole fact of financing. Mm-hmm. But, you know, we've certainly seen a lot of matrimonial breakdown or, you know, couples breaking up. Mm-hmm. And I think that's certainly a risk. And I think the other risk is if someone does pass away, what are the estate obligations in terms of this real property?
Can that be worked out, though, through the legal framework?
Yeah, beforehand? You can certainly work it out through, you know, a will. Obviously, wills are very, very important. And I think depending on how you have the deed set up, sometimes you can automatically, you know, grant the other person the deed. So I think looking at a will and looking at how the deed's going to be set up, I think that's certainly important if you're worried about things like estate issues. And, you know, when we're talking about things like matrimonial breakdown or, you know, couples breaking up, you know, getting a cohabitation agreement in place, I think, is important. Obviously, if you are married and it is your matrimonial property act or your matrimonial property, that certainly has an impact because the Matrimonial Property Act here in Nova Scotia certainly will govern that as well.
And of course, not everybody has to live in the home, or do they?
No, they don't.
Right.
So we certainly see lots of scenarios where we'll see a co-signer. Co-signers are the most common. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, in rare cases, a guarantor may be on the mortgage and not even on the title of the property, Todd. Mm-hmm. So that really does happen. You know, sometimes we see, you know, parents coming in with their younger adult children and, you know, they want to guarantee the mortgage or something like that. And being a guarantor is certainly not as common, Todd, as maybe it was, you know, once was. Usually lenders want the borrower to be on the title of the property because then they have a little bit more skin in the game. And it's really important when it comes to things like, you know, collection or, you know, if they have to serve them legal documents. If they're on title, it's a lot easier to maybe track them down. But certainly the borrowers do not need to live in the property. But, you know, to be honest with you, I'm seeing a lot of larger family gifts, and sometimes that's a great way to, you know, mitigate that risk of co-signing for your adult child. I know that's not possible for everyone, Todd, but we certainly see a lot of young first-time homebuyers coming in with 6-figure gifts from mother, father, brother, sister in that type of family orientation. And the reason that we're seeing a lot of gifts, and I've heard this directly from the parents, it's because they said, we have benefited from our property increasing in value. And the only way that we're going to get these kids into a home, maybe now or ever, is going to be gifting them basically a piece of the equity. So we're seeing some of the parents even coming into us for mortgage financing.
All right. So over the last number of years, and you've been in this business for a long, long time, are you seeing more? Is the frequency of this type of dynamic? It's increasing from what I'm gathering here.
100%. It's increasing. I think people are becoming more creative. I think it's just the nature of what's happened with the increases in the prices. And, you know, in Halifax, we've never really had the boom in the prices, Todd. Obviously, we've had a lot of price increases over the last 2 and 3 years, but our market is certainly more stable than in many other areas of the country. I can tell you, I talk to colleagues in Ontario and Alberta and BC all the time, and they're in dire straits in terms of what's happened with their property values. And people just can't qualify to get into the property ladder at all, just due to the price point. So, yeah, we're feeling some of this pain here, but people are still transacting every day. And I think our market is becoming more balanced. You know, we still need much more inventory to, you know, satisfy the amount of demand that we have just due to, you know, our population growing. So we definitely need more homes for sale and we need more construction. But it's certainly a very much more balanced market than in the rest of the country.
Right. Home construction, though, is that I had a story last week. I read a story last week where it can be dicey to invest in a new property, into a new home, just the way that the financing works. And you and I have talked about this on our show, of course, Mortgage 101. So what's your advice to people if they are potentially looking at a new home route?
I think sometimes people think like new and shiny is going to be, you know, without problems. It's like buying a new car. You're driving it off the lot. It should be good for a few years. With new home construction, it's not always the same type of scenario. Usually what I tell buyers is if you can buy a resale home, someone else has already worked out the problems. You don't have to worry about construction liens. You don't have to worry about the, you know, as much the quality of the construction because it's kind of tied and tested, right?
Right.
With new construction, I think the biggest concern right now, obviously, is delays in terms of getting it complete. And some builders are just not meeting their obligations under the, you know, the contract. Sometimes in these new home construction contracts, they're also now putting in clauses around inflation and increasing the construction price or the purchase price of the home just because of what's happening with inflation. So I think that's something that you really need to think about. And sometimes the time frame for construction is just very prohibitive for people. Normally when we can guarantee an interest rate, we're getting it locked in 120 days before that mortgage was to fund. But with new home construction, sometimes the construction can take 1 to 2 years plus sometimes, just depending on what type of property that's being built. And who knows what's going to happen with interest rates. I'm optimistic that we're now more in a plateau situation, but I think everyone can agree interest rates across the board are high.
All right, so you mentioned inflationary costs might go up, therefore the builder could potentially charge more. What's the burden of proof for that, though? Because some might have concerns that they'll just builder could just simply say, we have to increase your price. How much do they have to prove to justify that increase?
I don't know what they need to do to actually meet that burden of proof, but I can tell you everyone can agree that we're in an inflation situation. Obviously, the inflation has slowed since the Bank of Canada has started increasing interest rates, 12 to 18 months ago. But inflation is still a real thing. And we don't know what's going to happen in another 3 to 6 months. We didn't think we were going to be in the situation that we're at now. But I'm optimistic that inflation has slowed. So I think hopefully that'll be less of a concern. But I can tell you there's certainly builders that have lost their shirts, Todd.
Yeah.
And some of these builders have, been able to make good on their contracts. But some have had to either terminate the contracts altogether or really have had to slow the delivery of that final product just due to the cost of materials and also the cost of labor.
Absolutely. So, again, if people are looking at this and there may be perhaps people listening right now who hadn't thought of that, say, yeah, and then they might have friends or whatever it might be who they feel they might want to pool their resources together with. What's a good starting point for people?
Well, I think having the conversation first and just figuring out, okay, how does everyone's income look? How does everyone's credit look? How are the assets? Do you have the money together for the down payment? And then figure out really what your budget's going to be. I think the very first step is getting a pre-approval. So I think going and seeking the advice of an unbiased mortgage professional, I think is going to be key, especially in a situation like this. Bring everyone in together, get all the, laundry laid out on the table, and then really figure out what the best next path is forward. Once you have the pre-approval in place, then you're going to want to seek the advice of a realtor and figure out really what's going to make sense. What type of home is going to work for this type of, housing unit, and then go from there. I can tell you there certainly are properties for sale, Todd. We're doing transactions every single day, and people are certainly becoming more creative. So if you're a first-time home buyer, it's a great way to enter that real estate market and the real estate ladder. And maybe it's not a forever plan, but maybe this is the plan for the next 5 years or something like that. And then in that next, maybe at that 5-year mark, then maybe everyone agrees together the property's going to be sold, or maybe one person's going to buy it out and then move forward. It's a good way to enter the market, and I certainly think we're going to see more of that in the years to come.
Okay, and Bank of Canada and its interest rate announcement tomorrow, so you'll be on again after that. Your foreshadowing prediction, what do you have for us on that?
I'm going to put up a poll here on Twitter once we're done, so you can check it out at Clinton Wilkins. I'm on Twitter. I'm going to predict a hold. Okay, just due to what's going on with inflation. I think probably people that are in a variable rate mortgage have a home equity line of credit or any liabilities tied to the prime rate. That's obviously impacted by the key overnight rate. That will be music to everyone's ears. I'm going to predict a hold. I think some economists think that there may be another increase maybe down the road, depending on what happens with inflation. We'll see tomorrow. The Bank of Canada will be doing their key overnight rate announcement at 11 a.m. our time. I'll announce it live on our social media, and then we'll be on with you tomorrow shortly after lunch, I think.
Okay. Clinton, great stuff. Thank you so much, my friend.
Thanks for having me, Todd.
All right, take care. That's Clinton Wilkins, our mortgage guru.